4 students were killed by gunfire: Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheurer, and William Schroeder. Scheurer and Schroeder weren't participating in the protest. They were merely walking to class. 9 more people were wounded, one of whom, Dean Collar, was paralyzed. Allison Krauss was a girl of Jewish descent who was part of the protest. On her grave is a quote she told one of the guardsmen the day before she died: "Flowers are better than bullets." Jeffrey Miller had just recently transferred from Michigan State University. He was actively participating in the protest that fateful day and was shot and killed by the guardsmen. Sandra Scheurer, known to her friends as Sandy, was also killed in the Kent State shootings. She was an honors student in speech therapy. She was not participating in the demonstrations, but was killed when a bullet struck her in the throat as she was peacefully walking to her next class. William Schroeder, ironically, was attending the university on an ROTC scholarship and was only going to class when he was killed. He had avoided all demonstrations. He was killed when a bullet entered below his left shoulder and exited his chest. The news of the Kent State University shootings shocked the public. The school was closed for the rest of the semester, as were hundreds of other colleges across the country. The next weekend, 100,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. to participate in a protest against troops being sent to Cambodia. When the famous singer-songwriter Neil Young saw the photos taken at the scene, he wrote the song "Ohio" in commemoration of the tragedy. The Nixon administration seemed to point fingers at the protesters for provoking the guardsmen. President Nixon's response to the shootings was simply, "When dissent turns into violence, it invites tragedy," which struck many as cold. Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, said the tragedy was predictable, and the president's speechwriter, Ray Price, expressed sympathy for the guardsmen, calling them a bunch of scared kids with guns. According to a Gallup poll, most of the American public believed the protesters were primarily to blame. The guardsmen who shot into the crowd claimed they did so in self-defense. They felt their lives were in danger. They testified that the protesters were advancing on them in a threatening way that warranted shooting. Some historians who've investigated the shootings have accused the guardsmen of conspiring to shoot into the crowd before they retreated back up Blanket Hill. A presidential commission that investigated the matter concluded that the tragedy was unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. A 1970 FBI investigation into the shootings found that the guardsmen were not in danger and that they fabricated this defense. There was a civil trial brought before the families of the victims. The judge in the federal trial dismissed it early on because of the weak case brought against the guardsmen. An Ohio grand jury put blame on the university officials and protesters, but not the guardsmen. The civil trial was appealed several times before it was settled out of court in 1979. The victims and the families of the students killed received the collective sum of $675,000 paid by the state of Ohio. The reparations came with a signed statement from the guardsmen in which they expressed their regret at the tragedy. No official apology was ever issued. As a response to the tragedy, many memorials were established to honor the victims. Each year since 1971, students, faculty, and others gather at 11 p.m. on May 3rd to take part in a candlelight procession around the perimeter of the campus. Following the walk, a vigil begins with people positioned in the spots where the 4 students were killed. There are several memorials on the campus of Kent State. The purpose of this site is to reflect on how differences may be resolved peacefully. Constructed of carnelian granite, a stone associated with strength and time, the memorial is surrounded by 58,175 daffodils, the number of the country's losses in Vietnam. A plaza bound by a granite walkway merges with the sidewalk winding from residence halls to the heart of the academic campus. The plaza extends onto the hillside, ending in a jagged, abstract border symbolic of disruptions and the conflict of ideas. Its fractured edge suggests the tearing of the fabric of society. A granite wall built along the entry defines the plaza as a significant gathering area. The wall is representative of both shelter and conflict. Engraved in the plaza's stone threshold are the words "Inquire, Learn, Reflect." The monument ensures that no one will forget the events of May 4th or the lessons taught to us by the violence of that day.